The lawyer had barely finished reading the fourth line when Camilla's son stopped him. "Read that again." But Prince William wasn't looking at the legal document anymore. He was holding out a ring of 3 antique keys. He wasn't offering them. He was taking them back across the table. Nobody moved. Not Camilla, not her children, not even King Charles, who had spent years allowing one dangerous assumption to settle over the family like dust. Ravensmere belonged to them. The morning ambush. No motorcade, no royal announcement, and no flashing lights. Just one dark vehicle going through the eastern gates. It was 8:46 in the morning. The air felt heavy and damp, typical of an English morning. Prince William wasn't alone. 2 solicitors stepped out of the vehicle right behind him, moving in sync. They carried identical black briefcases. That was the first warning. The second warning came right after. William refused to enter through the main doors of the estate. He didn't walk up the grand staircase or go to the formal drawing room. He avoided the warmth of the roaring fireplaces. Instead, he walked around the side of the large historic house, crossing the wet gravel courtyard. His footsteps broke the morning silence. He entered through the old estate office. This room felt cold and forgotten, where land records had been stored since Queen Victoria's time. Why would the Prince of Wales skip the luxurious family parlor and head straight to this dusty records room? He wanted to send a message without saying a word. This was not a family meeting. It was an execution. By 9:05, Camilla had been informed that William was inside. She thought nothing of it, assuming he was there to discuss upcoming renovations. The estate, known as Ravensmere, needed significant repairs. 2 ancient lead roofs were leaking, threatening important historic plasterwork. There had been quiet talks about converting several outer cottages for her extended family members. King Charles had supported this idea privately, though not formally. This detail would matter later on. You'll always have Ravensmere. 5 simple words, but they became dangerous when money was spent based on them. Camilla's family arrived at the estate expecting a smooth private meeting with no arguments or confrontations, just a few signatures on standard paperwork. They believed the estate had been settled for nearly 15 years. Ravensmere was a breathtaking property with 12,000 acres, a stunning Jacobean manor, 42 cottages, 2 working farms, and a massive private lake. It housed rare paintings not listed in any public royal inventory. Even the staff acted as if the future ownership was certain. They recently started calling a sunlit upstairs room Mr. Parker B.S.'s study. They had placed fresh flowers there that morning, wanting it to be perfect for him. Expensive architects drew up renovation plans. They made sure antique furniture would fit through the doorways. One of Camilla's relatives talked about moving expensive horses to the estate's southern paddocks. Camilla's son even got a grand tour of the underground wine cellar and learned which rare bottles belonged to the house in which he could drink freely. Imagine hearing that for years, feeling like the future owner every time you drove through the gates. Then imagine William walking into the room and placing a 6-page legal opinion on the wooden table. He looked directly at Camilla's children and said, "None of you were ever beneficiaries." That shocking sentence changed the tone of the morning meeting and altered the past. Suddenly, every promise sounded different. Every plan for renovations became questionable. Every room they called their own actually belonged to someone else. But who did it belong to? That was the key question. William firmly refused to answer. Not yet. The phantom inheritance. Camilla entered the cold estate office nervously shortly after 9:20. Charles followed her a few minutes later, visibly irritated. His jaw was tight and his posture was rigid. He was angry that this issue had not been discussed with him privately first. As the king, he expected respect. William did not stand up when his father entered the room. This detail alone made the atmosphere very tense. He stayed seated beside his lead solicitor, relaxed yet guarded. One hand rested on a faded, cracked leather folder. Charles looked down at the table and at the folder. He recognized the faded gold crest. It belonged to his grandmother, the Queen Mother. At that moment, the confidence disappeared from the king's face and color drained from his cheeks. Charles had not bought Ravensmere. He didn't purchase it with his own money or receive it as a gift from the state. It was not even standard crown estate property that belonged to the ruling monarch. Instead, it was part of a private family settlement created decades ago by a generation that knew how to protect wealth. The settlement had been legally changed 3 times. The first change prevented the agricultural land from being sold off. The second change protected the historic manor house from the loss of its assets. The third change protected something nobody in the room had checked, the succession clause. Charles had what lawyers call a life interest. This means he could use Ravensmere, maintain it, and receive some income from the 2 working farms there. However, he could not transfer ownership of the estate to anyone outside the family bloodline named in the original settlement, not by a promise, a handwritten letter, or even a royal command. The King of the United Kingdom could not give away this house. Camilla's daughter shifted in her chair and asked the obvious question. If His Majesty controls the estate during his lifetime, why can't he choose what happens to it after? One of William's solicitors opened the faded leather folder. The sound of the crinkling paper was loud in the quiet room, because that choice was legally taken away from him before his marriage. There was absolute silence, the kind of silence that rings in your ears. This decision was made before the royal wedding, not after. Someone in the royal family anticipated this exact fight years before anyone else did. Everyone expected William to say his grandmother's name, Queen Elizabeth II. He didn't. The legal amendment was signed and notarized in late 1999, 3 years before the Queen Mother passed away, and 6 years before Charles married Camilla in 2005. Next to the Queen Mother's shaky signature was another bold signature, Princess Margaret's. Now, the atmosphere in the room was not just legally tense. It felt deeply personal. The bloodline trap. Princess Margaret was one of the original trustees of the estate. She was known for her sharp eyes and was suspicious of outsiders. Margaret fiercely protected the family's private property. Documents that are now available show that she raised a serious concern at a trust meeting. She was worried that Ravensmere could easily end up in a new family through a future marriage not approved by the original settler. She didn't mention anyone by name, not even Camilla. She didn't have to. The legal wording she required was harsh and left no room for doubt. The solicitor read it out, his voice flat. No spouse, no child of a spouse, nor any descendant unrelated by direct blood to King George V, Sixth shall ever gain permanent title, controlling interest, or beneficial ownership of this estate. Camilla's children weren't named specifically, but that made the situation even worse. They were excluded as a whole concept before they even knew the estate existed. Charles leaned toward the solicitor, visibly angry. I was never told about this specific clause. William looked up, staring directly at his father. You signed a sworn acknowledgement of it. This was a heavy blow for Charles. The solicitor slid a photocopy across the table showing Charles's signature at the bottom, clearly dated November 1999. Something felt off. If Charles had signed this document, how could he believe that Ravensmere could go to Camilla's family? How could he have made those promises? Charles picked up the paper, his hands shaking slightly. He turned it over and looked at the date again, then back at William. For several painful seconds, he had no response. His own signature trapped him. The solicitor cleared his throat and explained that the acknowledgement was buried deeply in a complex financial restructuring plan. This plan involved 6 different royal properties. Ravensmere was only mentioned twice in the entire 100-page document. once by its obscure legal number and once by an old name that the family hadn't used since 1936. Charles may have signed without understanding the full meaning of the clause. Or worse, he might have known what it meant and thought he could change it later. There was another big problem. The clause could be changed, and that's what Camilla's legal team and her family had hoped for all along. All Charles needed to change it was the surviving estate trustees' written consent. However, there was only one trustee left who mattered. Prince William, the 99-year checkmate. Now you see why William had the antique keys. Charles felt trapped. Months earlier, he had tried to solve a big problem by approaching William. He avoided doing it directly because that would seem obvious, like begging. Instead, a trusted palace aide sent William a confidential proposal. The lengthy document described a plan for Ravensmere, calling it a necessary continuity arrangement. Continuity sounds harmless and peaceful. It's a perfect term for making a quiet promise permanent. William read the proposal and asked one question: who gets the ultimate benefit of the estate? The aide responded 2 days later. A new family trust would be created to benefit Camilla's children and grandchildren. William firmly rejected it without negotiation or an alternative. He returned the document with rejected scrolled in black ink, but Charles was desperate and did not give up. Next, he sent a more complex legal plan designed to hide wealth. In this plan, Camilla's family would not own Ravensmere directly, which would break the bloodline rule. Instead, they would get a 99-year lease for a symbolic rent of £1 The royal family would still own the estate on paper. In reality, William and his descendants would be locked out for a century. It was a clever plan, almost clever enough to work. But the suspicious Queen Mother had anticipated this trick. Hidden in the original trust paperwork was another trap. Any lease longer than 21 years required written approval from all living trustees. William rejected the second proposal too, shutting the door completely. That should have ended the hidden conflict, but it didn't. 3 weeks later, private construction contractors arrived at Ravensmere. They were not there for emergency repairs. They came to conduct a detailed residential survey. They measured the west wing and inspected the historic kitchens for modern upgrades. They also assessed if the old nursery corridor could be converted into luxury family apartments. Nobody informed Prince William. They thought he wouldn't notice. The fatal paper trail. William noticed something unusual in the estate maintenance accounts. A large invoice for an architectural survey totaling $18,400 was hidden among routine expenses for roof repairs and agricultural work. The description on the invoice caught his attention: future occupancy, adaptation, and spatial planning. He wondered who would be occupying this space in the future. Concerned, William requested all recent invoices, receipts, and work orders related to Ravensmere. After days of searching through the documents, he found a huge order for custom Ylt furniture. This included mahogany shelving, a temperature-controlled wine tasting room, and 2 luxurious bathrooms designed for full-time residents. He noted that the delivery paperwork listed Parker B.S. as the authorized recipient, not King Charles or Queen Camilla. In the cold estate office, Camilla argued that no one had tried to take anything legally. She claimed the surveys were just preliminary and that the furniture had not yet been installed. She reminded William that no formal lease had been signed. While this was technically true, William's real concern was proving they had prepared to inherit something they weren't entitled to. Camilla's son angrily pushed a folder away from him, insisting they acted on direct assurances. William replied quietly, "Assurances are not legal ownership." Everyone in the room knew the source of those assurances was King Charles. King Charles turned to William in anger, saying the situation could have remained private. William responded, "It was private until illegal trust funds were used for this." This was a critical point King Charles couldn't ignore. Royal families can manage public scandals, but financial records expose the truth. William had to challenge the spending as part of his responsibilities as a trustee. Seeing William's determination, Camilla realized this problem was larger than Ravensmere. Similar rules govern many royal properties. If William was willing to investigate this one case, what else might he uncover? This thought shifted her approach. She stopped arguing about rights and furniture and asked William a vital question. If we are barred from this estate, who will inherit it instead? William did not answer her directly. He just signaled to the solicitor to continue, the ultimate betrayal and the final reveal. The solicitor cleared his throat and turned to the 4th page of the document. He read aloud, so everyone in the room could hear. When King Charles eventually dies, Charles's life interest will end. The whole Ravensmere estate will then go to the next eligible beneficiary chosen by the Act of Trustees. Camilla's daughter interrupted, sounding relieved. Well, that's obviously William. He's the heir. It made sense that it was William, but just 9 days earlier, he had legally given up his claim to the estate. Nobody in the room knew this. Not King Charles, not Camilla, and not even the palace advisors. Why would Prince William fight hard to keep control of the estate, but then refuse to inherit it himself? He didn't want the massive house or the trouble of its ancient roofs. He just wanted to control what happened to it and ensure it didn't fall into the wrong hands. By legally renouncing his claim, he activated a little-known contingency clause that had been inactive for 27 years. The estate would go to the next royal sibling mentioned in the Queen Mother's original 1999 amendment. Everyone in the room was tense. Prince Harry. No, Harry's name wasn't in the document. Princess Anne. Yes, she was named, but had also given up her claim in a sealed declaration to the trust. She didn't want the responsibility. That left only one person in the royal family, Prince Andrew. King Charles worried for a moment. Giving the estate to Andrew would cause a public relations nightmare. Then the solicitor turned the last page. Andrew had been ruled out because of a strict rule triggered by his decision to step back from royal duties. So who was left? Prince Edward. At that moment, Camilla's son leaned in and said, "Read that again." The solicitor repeated it confidently. Prince Edward, the quiet Duke of Edinburgh, would be the new owner of the Ravensmere estate. But that wasn't the end of the surprises. Edward had known about this for weeks thanks to William. He quietly accepted the inheritance without any public celebrations or media attention. Instead, he added one strict condition to his acceptance. Ravensmere would not be his private home. Instead, its farms, cottages, and all its income would go into a new charity. This charity would help wounded military veterans, support bereaved military families, and provide shelter for young people aging out of foster care. The Grand Manor House would become a peaceful home for families of active service members receiving long-term medical treatment. Edward inherited the estate, but then immediately gave away everything it could earn for him. This shocked everyone in the room. Camilla's family didn't just lose Ravensmere to a future king. They lost it to a humble man who chose not to treat it as personal property. King Charles sat frozen, staring at the final proposal on the table. Charles had privately promised a large estate to part of his new family. Now that estate would forever carry his younger brother's name through a charity. Each restored cottage on the property would show that Charles's royal promises meant nothing. Every military family welcomed through the gates would remind everyone that Edward turned a huge royal inheritance into public service, while others were busy planning luxury upgrades for themselves. William slid 3 antique keys across the wooden table. He didn't give them to Camilla. He handed them to Prince Edward's solicitor. The heaviest key opened the archive room. The second key opened the manor's front doors. The smallest key opened a historic chapel on the estate. Edward had only visited this small chapel once as a boy with his grandmother. The signed trust agreement said this chapel would be the only part of the 12,000-acre Ravensmere estate reserved for his family, not for living or vacationing, but to remember her. Charles finally spoke up, his voice weak. "You arranged all of this without telling me." William replied gently, as if he had won a big battle. "You already made your own arrangements, father." This was the ultimate humiliation for King Charles. Neither a public uprising nor the press defeated him. Instead, he was quietly beaten by his own mistakes, a forgotten signature from 1999, and broken promises he couldn't keep trapped him. He was outsmarted by his younger brother, who took the estate and made it valuable for others. Camilla, still shocked, asked, "What happens to the rooms we already prepared, the ones we paid for?" The head solicitor closed the folder slowly, a sound that signaled finality. "They will go back to the original estate inventory. The custom shelving would be removed. The Parker Bowles private study name would disappear from conversations. The wine collection would remain locked away. Even the flowers arranged that morning would be taken out the back door before sunset." By evening, the nameplate on the upstairs door was unscrewed. No official announcement was made from the royal palace, and no public statement corrected the assumptions made by Camilla's family. Visitors driving past the gates saw nothing unusual. Inside the manor, one important thing changed. The 3 antique keys no longer hung beneath King Charles's portrait in the hallway. They were now in a simple wooden box beside a photo of the Queen Mother. On top of the keys was a note from Prince Edward with 7 powerful words: "Let this house belong to those who need it." So, who really won that cold morning? Was it William who set the trap? Was it Edward who quietly gave away the estate? Or was it the clever, cautious woman who locked everything away in 1999? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. The palace thought they were arguing over a country house.